Welcome to episode 218 of the Flying Free podcast. Today we are talking with Rhonda Noordyk, a certified divorce financial analyst who founded the Women's Financial Wellness Center in 2014. And her mission is to help reduce financial vulnerability for women going through divorce. She has impacted thousands of women through her signature coaching and consulting process, as well as her podcast called Divorce Conversations for Women. Welcome, Rhonda.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Say, let's start by having you tell us what in the world is a divorce financial analyst? What do you do? How do you help people? Why would someone want to
Yes.
hire someone like that?
Yes, absolutely. Well, I'll preface this by saying, the Certified Divorce Financial Analyst credential is something that I think is definitely getting a little bit more noticed, I guess, in the divorce space as just being highlighted as an expert who understands, the aspects of the financials related to the divorce process. I run the way that I do my business a little bit different in a sense that I'm not just coming in, crunching the numbers and then leaving. I'm actually helping manage the process and the people and the positioning so that my clients get a better outcome. And I think the other part of it is I want to help educate and empower them so when the divorce is over, they're in a better spot. They can stand firmly and strongly and confidently as they need to make financial decisions independently, in the future.
Yeah.
So fancy term for I can crunch the numbers, I can look at, different scenarios and strategies and help them determine, if they're looking at the financials, what are some pros and cons? What might they want to consider around, splitting assets or ways to go back and ask questions around support. I think the one thing that I find, Natalie, is a lot of times people will think, oh, well, the divorce process is black and white. We put in the numbers, the support calculator spits out the numbers, or we look at the assets and we just split them and I have found in doing this specific work for almost 9 years that it's not black and white, that everything's negotiable,
Mhm.
and sometimes we have to fight pretty hard to get 50-50. And so
Interesting.
it's very interesting and stuff that people wouldn't necessarily be able to, Google, that you see behind the scenes that you're like, what is going on here? Like this is very interesting. So there's still a lot of manipulation and a lot of control and a lot of bullying and a lot of all that stuff that's just not helpful to the situation. And I always tell people, like, I spend my day, and I love this visual. I have to find somebody who can go with me to take this because it's like I'm running up the down escalator, right? And eventually, after being out of, breath, I will eventually be at the top. But every case,
That's a
that's
great
kind of what it feels
analogy.
like,
Yeah.
it
Yes.
just we make traction, but it's not without effort and without intention and without a lot of times prayer and strategy. I mean, it's just a really important part of the overall process.
Yeah. So someone who is going through a divorce and invests in someone like you to help them, it's going to actually end up paying off in the end.
It is, yeah,
Yeah.
and thankfully I've been doing this long enough that I have data to support that, right? Because
Yeah.
when I
Yeah.
first started, I'm like, I know that I'm making a difference. But to date, we've been able to move. I've been able to help move about $20 million
Wow.
into the hands of women because when we know what questions to be asking, when we don't accept status quo, and we don't allow people to be able to just continue to manipulate and control, right? And
Yeah.
we're very strategic about that. It's making a difference. And
Yeah.
ultimately, that's making a difference in the lives of women after the divorce is over because one of the really disturbing stats is that women's lifestyle tends to go down 41% after the divorce is over, where her ex-spouse's income, right, may go down a little, but a lot of times they're continuing to excel,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
So 41%, if we looked at, round numbers, right, 100 grand, that's $41,000 less.
Yep.
That's a big deal.
Well, and so many of the women, especially the ones that I'm working with or that are listening to this podcast, there a lot of them are stay-at-home moms or homeschooling moms or people who weren't
Yeah.
building up a career. They don't really have anything to fall back on. And
Yeah.
their husbands, they were supporting their husbands who now have an established career and are moving onwards in their career. So I'm sure that that plays into that number as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of gaps to be addressed. I mean, the career gap, the wage gap, the just the power, the power gap, and unfortunately, there's a lot of layers that women have to go through, to navigate through those pieces.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what is the one financial question that keeps women stuck in abusive relationships?
I think the main question that they find themselves asking is, am I going to be okay?
Okay.
Um,
And are they based on your work?
if we can ask the right questions, if we can get the right team of people, absolutely. And I always say, again, we've got to get all the information to be able to, analyze what exactly that looks like. Um, but at the end of the day, it is it's just a process, right? It's
Yeah.
just a process. And the reason I say that is because there's a lot of times that people will be working with divorce experts and they'll say, "Oh, you're going to be just fine." And I'm like, "Well, okay, what does that mean though?"
Yeah.
Like it's not my job, it's not the attorney's job, it's not the coach's jobs to determine what fine is. We have to define what that is. And unfortunately, or fortunately, that's going to require us taking a look at the numbers. But at the end of the day, I think women find themselves a lot of times willing to be, I'll do whatever I need to do. I'll clip coupons. I'll stop, I won't get my hair done. I won't do that, and I'm like, okay, but we don't necessarily have to go to that extreme always. I mean, sometimes maybe for a temporary period of time, but their male counterparts are not saying, hey, I'm going to go through and I'm going to really hunker down on the budget. Like, they're like, hey,
Right.
listen, I want to buy a new car and peace out, I'm doing it. Like,
Yes.
they do. It's just like, it just boggles my mind, right? So,
Yeah.
I don't want, my goal is that in working with women to get the right information, so we get the right answers, so they're empowered to make good decisions. They're not leaving money on the table, that they're not eating rice and beans. They don't feel, they've built in a buffer in their budget to do fun things, with their kids and with their life, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. So what are seven things that they can do to prepare financially for divorce? And and when I say prepare, are we talking about like just getting ready for the process or during the process?
I would say probably a little bit of both, but for the most part, again, if people are listening and they've already started and filed, there's definitely going to be things here that apply to them. If they haven't filed, this is also going to be for them as well.
Okay, good.
Um, so I would say the first thing, and I'm all about practical, right? Like we can crunch numbers, we can run all these. I'm just like, okay, let's roll up our sleeves with the practical things we can do. So the first thing is jot down the expenses, right? Just get a really good handle of the day-to-day expenses. Now, a lot of times women do have a good handle on the bills, right? They may be the ones who are actually, paying the bills, staying on top of that kind of stuff or whatever as part of, the divide and conquer for managing the household. But the reason that this is so important is because as we move through the divorce process, one of the biggest foundational pieces is the budget. It helps with answering a lot of the financial related questions. Rhonda, can I stay in the house? Well, we need to go look at income expenses. We need to look at the picture. We need to crunch some numbers, right? Rhonda, what about health insurance? Like all the questions, right? Like, and I would encourage women, if they're listening, right, grab a pen, jot down what if, like all the what if questions, get them out of your mind on paper related to the finances. But I am pretty confident, right, that every single question is somehow related to the budget. So we get a handle on the current expenses, electric bill, phone, cell phone, all the things. And that becomes a foundation for future questions getting answered, but also for support negotiations. Because there's about 12 different factors that the attorneys will look at for determining support, and one of which is need, and the other is the party's ability to pay. Two simple ones, right? And so we have been able to use our budget many times in helping our clients negotiate to get better support outcomes because we've done the homework.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty powerful. And so, and it is also probably one of the easiest ways for the other party, as we're talking about, manipulation and control, to control. Well, she's overspending. and they get overly critical on things that really they shouldn't be, um, which again is also part of that control. Like I have a client right now, and her husband, very, very successful physician, um, and she has no access to cash. She has no access to checks. She has access to one credit card. And they've started the process, and he's like, she's spending too much. I'm like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? No, she isn't.
Mm,
And so he's like, well, I'm limiting what she can spend each month on the credit card. Meanwhile, he's over here doing his own thing,
yeah.
spending whatever, buying a house, buying his, and separated his expenses so she can't see what he's spending.
Yeah.
So it's a real
Yeah.
problem.
So what's another what's
So, number
number
one.
2?
Yes, number one, jot down those expenses. Number two,
Yeah.
start gathering the financials. And a lot of times, if people don't have access, so if there's women that are listening that say, Rhonda, I don't have access to statements. I don't even know what we have. Well, first of all, I'll say you're not alone. Secondly, women become very, very good private investigators when they have to be.
Yes.
So watching the mail and just taking notes like, oh, we've got something from the credit union. Huh, interesting. Jot the name down. Oh, there's something from an insurance company. Oh, jot it down. Now, some of it may be junk mail, right? Some of it you maybe can open, whatever. But at the end of the day, that becomes very, very helpful. The other thing that women can do as part of the gathering of documents, right, is remembering that they can also go to the IRS directly. So a lot of times I'll talk to clients who say, Rhonda, I haven't signed a tax return in years because it's all electronic. So, if the spouse is preparing them or whatever, they just e-sign their name. So
Yeah.
they don't actually see the returns. So you can actually go directly to the IRS and you can request transcripts. You don't have to have your spouse's
Nice.
permission. It's just like a little workaround that you can get the info. And women
You can
have been,
get everything that
you can get
way.
everything.
Oh
Like
my gosh, that's amazing.
it's fabulous. So, but the tax returns are really helpful because when the women get them, they're like, oh my gosh, he's making what? And here she's been led to believe this whole time, like, we're barely getting by. Like, you're spending too much. Like, and so she's
Yes.
clipping coupons. She's, managing the household funds. Meanwhile, she's realizing, so two different stories happening here, right?
Yeah.
So
Oh
it's a big
gosh,
deal.
that's really good.
Yeah, so
Okay.
that's the second one. The third one, be curious. So a lot of times we find ourselves in these spots where we're like, we find information that is very unsettling, right? Because we have been led to believe something maybe other than what we're finding. And when we put on that investigative hat and we now become like very aware of what's around us, um, we may find ourselves getting emotionally upset, right? Sometimes
Mhm.
we may find credit cards in our name. We might find pictures of, other relationships that our spouse is having. We might find, medications that we're like, they're on what? Like there's a lot of things that women end up finding that are outside of the scope of just the financial documents. But one of the best ways that I have found for clients to neutralize that is to say, huh, isn't that interesting? Rather
Yes.
than, what? How did I not know about this? He did what, it's like, hmm, isn't that interesting? And then you just kind of set it aside and you just look at it like I'm just gathering info, just gathering information.
Right.
And
I think
then,
that
yeah,
is that it requires that level of radical acceptance that this person is not, if you go into it knowing in your mind, this person is not who I thought I married. So it may be that I find out some things about him that I
yes,
didn't know about, and kind of expect that instead of, I think we gaslight ourselves and think, "Oh, maybe he's not as bad as he really is." Most of them are worse than you think that they are, unfortunately.
it's true. It's
Yeah.
really true. And I think women, because of how we're wired, right, we want to believe the best. We
Yes.
want to be hopeful. I mean, right? Like I'm
Especially
sure
us
you,
Christian women.
right, right. Like you're like, okay, right. That's exactly kind of,
Yep.
and it's a great skill. But it really can keep us stuck,
Yeah.
right, in these types of situations.
Yeah.
So the other follow-up question to that is we can also say, can you help me better understand fill in the blank? And that could be something that we ask to our spouse if the timing is right. That could be other professionals. Like as you find information, it's like, hey, can you help me understand this document that I just found? I just found this document. Can you help me better understand this? Like, and it just kind of puts us in this mindset of being curious and hopefully will help us extract information that we need from the other person without them feeling defensive.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that.
The fourth thing, simple, is download Credit Karma. So this is a free app that basically you can download. I love it because it allows you to be proactive rather than having to go out, once a year and download your credit report or even looking on like credit card statements. This will allow people to be able to get notifications if there's a change. Credit score goes up, credit score goes down, something else is opened in your name. Like we don't have to go out and search for it. It pops in our text or our email and we're like, oh, this is great. Out of sight, out of mind, and yet you've got some monitoring happening.
That is amazing. I did not know that. Like I'm learning so many good things right now.
Yes, it's awesome. And anytime I'm like recommending an app, I mean, I've been using Credit Karma for probably, I don't know, 6 or 7 years because I'm like, okay, I'm going to test it. Is this really legit? Whatever. It's
Yeah.
been awesome.
Oh,
Absolutely awesome.
wow. Credit
Um,
Karma? Like
yes,
Karma.
yes.
Okay.
Yep. And one of the things that I noticed on mine, so I had the medical bill. It was like for $30. They ended up sending me to collections. Well, I would have had no idea that they had done that, right? So you're like, what is going
Interesting.
on? So I go on, I take care of it, and then I'm like, okay, cool. Now I'm going to watch and see how long it takes for that to come off of my credit score or whatever. And it took maybe like 10 days. And then I got a notification like, hey, your credit score has gone up 30 points or whatever. And I'm like, oh, perfect. I log in. What was the reason? Oh, great. That's been taken care of. And then you kind of like move on. So it's been awesome.
Say,
Um,
can you on this subject, can you actually talk about the importance of good credit and how like what can women do? I may be deviating a little bit, or maybe you were going to touch on this later, but what can women do if like let's say their husband is taking out a credit card on their name or like what are they supposed to do about that?
Yeah, it gets a little bit tricky. I mean, certainly my suggestion would be that they try to call the credit card company, right? And say, hey, listen, this has been taken out in my name. I didn't authorize this or whatever. The tricky part is, especially as you're kind of like approaching the divorce process, a lot of times people don't really want to get into the weeds with like who opened what credit. Like technically, they're like, okay, well, if they opened it up in your name, how do we know that you didn't authorize it? And you're technically could be on the hook for half of it. You know what I mean? So it's like so the monitoring part is really important so you can stay on top of it so that if something does happen, you can address it. But I would say the best way to do that is probably to reach out to the company itself and say, hey, I didn't authorize this.
Okay.
But
Okay.
on the flip side of that, one other thing, kind of now that you pointed that out, that I've seen is sometimes people will have on their homes a home equity line of credit. And
Yeah.
I have a client right now whose spouse took out about their house is paid off, but he took out a $250,000 line. And I said to her, I'm like, that makes me a little nervous because if he goes and spends it, he could spend on the line all he wants, up to 250 grand. She's technically on the hook,
Yeah.
right, for half of it, or could be. So it's really, really important to I'm always of the mindset that I would rather be proactive and try to build in some of those boundaries than to try to deal with that stuff later because it's too hard once somebody has gone off the rails and spent a bunch of money to get it. You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube.
Yep.
If the money isn't there to offset that, then where does it come from? Like it just gets really messy. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
yeah.
and then also some women don't know maybe that they have to if credit cards are all in their husband's name, then they don't have a credit score. And
Yes.
that's something that they have to have if they want to be able to like survive on their own too. A
Yeah.
lot of people don't know that, I think.
Yeah. And opening up, a credit card is not a bad idea. I mean, certainly to just kind of have something that you can be building. And sometimes banks or credit unions will have certain programs where there'll actually be like a debit card almost, where it serves as a credit card to help people build up their credit. But it's interesting because, when we look historically, it was like the late 70s when women could actually take out loans, credit card type stuff without having to have a male counterpart signature. And I
That was in
think
the 70s?
it was.
What? Oh
Yes.
my word.
Yes, the late 70s. And I'm like, what is going on? And I think a lot of times women still like there's an opportunity, I think, for women to kind of um reestablish their relationship with credit. Credit is not bad.
Yeah.
Debt is not necessarily bad depending on what type of debt it is, right? But I think there's still a lot of anxiety around that. Like, I don't know, I've never taken out a credit card before. Well, I always prefer, like for my clients, I'll say, hey, go to the bank and talk to somebody at the bank and have them help you with a credit. You don't have to like go on and take out, all the free offers on, that come through the mail or go online. Just go to the bank. A lot of times they have a relationship with a credit card company that they can help you, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
And there's nothing to say you couldn't set up a little checking account or whatever so you've got something in your name as well.
Well, when my kids are launching, I always have them get a credit card and then a bank account and they attach them and they have their bank automatically pays off their credit card every month. So
Huh.
and I tell them just everything you buy, put it on the credit card, but then have your bank pay it off. And then they'll get a credit card that actually gives them a percentage of cash back too. So that's how you can kind of
Mm-hmm.
play the system and actually make money using a credit card instead of lose money.
Yeah.
But and also build your credit card or credit score at the same time as well. It's just one other idea.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Yeah, no, for sure. So, yeah, so number five is really important. And this is avoid prematurely agreeing to options before you have all of the information.
Mm,
So, the reason for that is because a lot of times, right, especially those of us who like to keep the peace, we're like, oh, well, he said this is going to be amicable, which right, means devoid of conflict, which is just not even, I don't even like the word because there's going to be conflict. It's what do we do with the conflict? How do we show up in the conflict? Do we have good, healthy, communication skills and stuff like that? But anyways, I think, avoiding to say, oh yeah, well, he said I could keep the house and he'll keep his pension, or I can keep the house and he'll keep his 401k. And it sounds really great and it sounds really generous. But what it's doing is it's creating a false sense of financial security.
yep.
And I find that women in particular, because we want to be able to honor our word, we want to be respectful of the fact that we agreed to it, becomes more difficult for us to change our mind later, even though more information may become available.
Yes. Yes. Plus it goes back to that thing where we're believing the best about the other person and it's like this magical thinking. Now all of a sudden they're going to cooperate and give you half and make those promises. That's what they've been doing the entire marriage relationship and then
Yep.
pulling out the rug from underneath you. So, what makes you think that this now going through a divorce is going to be any different? It's not. It's
And it might be
not going to be
worse.
any different.
Yeah, and it might be worse. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, I think
They're
to that.
mad. They're mad that you're doing,
That's right.
especially if you filed, they're mad that you're doing this and they're going to get you back, but they're going to be manipulative and tell you lies and
Yep.
everything. And so yeah, I just think women have to expect that. And it's kind of it's a little bit of cognitive dissonance because you don't want to believe
Yes.
that. You're projecting your own goodwill onto them. And
Yeah.
why are you divorcing them in the first
Right.
place? Just
Right.
keep that in mind when you're, working with them.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and we really have to have that honest, like soul-wrenching conversation with ourselves, right? To say, okay, what does the history look like? What have been those experiences? And yeah, do we feel like in the midst of this now suddenly, things are going to be different? Most likely not. And
Yeah.
so I think it's just really important. And I think again, one of the strategies that people that are in these types of relationships, the spouse who's the controlling, narcissistic type person will will make it seem like they're being very generous.
Yep.
Oh, well, do you ever think that I would, leave you and the kids homeless? Of course I want you to, have a roof over your head. Of course I want, and you're like, well, see, they're being really nice to me. Well, yeah, but what are you giving up in exchange for that? We don't even know the whole picture.
Yes. Yes.
So I'm a big proponent
Totally.
of like, let's just get the info. Um, Number six is be aware of what I call the DAM method. Now, what I mean by this is, as people are going through the divorce process, one of the biggest challenges is that people think, hey, we're going through the divorce, everything's going to be transparent, all the parties are going to disclose all of their assets and liabilities, but but I have found that they implement what I call the DIM method, which is where they do a couple things strategically to help themselves avoid having to be transparent. The outcome is only as good as the transparency that we get. So this is really, really critical. And so the D stands for dodging. So you ask them for information, they dodge. They just don't respond. They too busy, blah, blah, blah. Then they avoid having assets actually appraised or valued by a third party. So this could be pensions. This could be classic cars. This could be homes. This could be businesses. Like they don't want anybody else to actually value, oh, it's doing terrible. My business is doing terrible. The cars aren't worth anything. The story goes on, right?
Yeah.
And we believe them because we're like, well, yeah, I mean, he said it's not worth anything. Okay, but where's the follow-up, documentation to
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
And again, we have to weigh all of those options out. I had a client whose husband had 20 classic cars. Now, we can't get them valued on Kelley Blue Book like we would just regular everyday vehicles because the Kelley Blue Book doesn't go back that far and we need an expert. So we hired an expert to help us value those. And at the end of the day, the car valuation expert ended up being an expert trial for or witness for the trial, and the values came back at $500,000.
Wow.
And it cost her $400 per car, 8 grand investment. I helped her kind of evaluate what made the most sense. Do we do it? Do we not? Let's look at what the possible outcomes could be. And she decided to do it, and she's super glad she did,
Oh, yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But it would have been easy to say, well, yeah, I mean, maybe they're only worth 10 grand each, or maybe they're, you know, but really at the end of the day, they were worth significantly more than that.
Yeah.
And he did try to dodge too. He moved vehicles, but we had a private investigator. It was like a whole crazy scenario, but it worked out. And so we got to just kind of hold our ground on some of these things. And then misrepresenting the data. And what I mean by that is they will just give you bits and pieces. Like they'll give you a page of the statement here and this here and that here. And you're like, oh my gosh, but they don't actually give you like the whole picture. Or though I had a client one time who said, oh my gosh, my husband, she wrote on a legal pad, here's all the assets that we have. And I'm like, okay, that's great. Start. Like, where are the supporting documentation? She goes, well, I don't have those. I'm like, well, okay, well, we can't actually officially confirm the numbers on this legal pad until we have the statements. So
Yeah.
we just got to make sure that we've got the right information.
Yeah.
But people play games with that. So we want to avoid the DIM method for sure and just be aware of that. And then the seventh thing is focus on establishing your core team. And I feel like there needs to be people in kind of 3 different camps, right? You have to have the legal, of course, the financial, and then the emotional, whether that's a coach, therapist, combination thereof. But those are kind of like the core. And then if you need ancillary people like car valuation expert, pension valuation expert, forensic accounting, some of those other pieces, those are certainly add-ons that people can kind of evaluate if they want to do. I would say the one thing that I would mention with that is a lot of times when women come to me and they say, hey, I'm kind of feeling like I might want to have a forensic accountant kind of go back and look at the historical data. And I say, okay, they said, well, my attorney says that I probably shouldn't do it because it's going to be too expensive. And I'm like, well, what do you have a quote on it? Like, do you know how much it's going to be? No. Okay, well, let's just get the information and have them look at the scope and see exactly how much it's going to be, and then we can evaluate if it makes, sense. But my job as a CDFA is to take a look at current data and then do some forward projections and some forward vision as far as, okay, if we do this specific situation and look at this specific option and outcome, what does that look like down the road? Whereas a lot of times CPAs and forensic accountants are looking backwards on historical. I'm looking forward.
Okay.
So that's
Okay. That's good
probably a
to
big
know.
differentiator.
Yeah. Okay. So, what are some financial questions that women should be asking when they're beginning this process?
Kind of to some of the stuff that we talked about, I think the main thing would be, and a lot of it is really probably asking themselves, right? Like, what is it that I want around the finances? Do I really feel like I want to be able to try to keep the home and see if that's possible? Do I really feel like I don't want to stay here and it's too difficult and I really want to look at, some other options? So I think that's probably the first thing. The second thing is kind of reconnecting with their values. What are my values? What's important to me? I think that's a good foundational piece. The other piece of it is, hey, what do we have and where is it? I mean, as simple as that, right? What
Yeah.
assets do we have? What liabilities do we have and where are they?
Yeah.
Um, and just having that attitude of being curious, help me understand what this is and stuff like that. So those are probably some of the key questions that I would ask. And then the values piece is important because as people are establishing their team, you want to make sure that you're selecting people that are in alignment with things that are important to you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. So what about the women though who I know we have a lot of listeners who are coming out of conservative Christian communities. A lot of them are homeschooling moms or stay-at-home moms and they maybe haven't handled the finances during the marriage. What about them if they're just completely in the dark?
Yeah. It's challenging, right? So again, we've got to put on that private investigative hat, right? To be able to start just looking for clues. It's definitely really, really challenging for sure. Some of the things that we have done is rather than looking at maybe existing expenses, we look at projected and we say, okay, well, if you were on your own, let's just say, right, and you were either renting or had a more like let's go through this kind of like mock scenario of what that would look like. Because we've got to start somewhere,
Yeah.
and it's almost easier at that point to start from scratch and start fresh than try to recreate over here and get frustrated with it. So that's sometimes something that we'll do. The other thing is depending on the complexity of the situation. So if their spouse owns businesses, or has multiple, they have rental properties or stuff like that, where they're like, yeah, I think we've got this property or we've got this business. I don't really know much about it. I know he's got all these dealings over here, and I'm not really into, what's going on. Sometimes we'll actually we'll talk about hiring a private investigator. So I work with a private investigator out of New York who I partner with to do an asset search. So they look for titles on vehicles and properties and business ownership and assets. Now we're not getting exact bank account, numbers and values because of course we can't get to that. But we get enough information that starts to really kind of dial in some additional clues that can help.
Okay. And
Um,
sometimes when you find one piece, can't you find like trails to other pieces too?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Or more questions that then you're like, okay, at least we know. Because at the end of the day, the attorneys are only able to ask for what they know. And again, the divorce process is set up where, in theory, both parties in the beginning are supposed to be very transparent on what they have. So if they bring those financials to the table, but yet they, don't include everything, how would we know
Exactly.
where to even start looking unless we have an expert kind of give us some insight? So that, and I think it's there's no easy answer to that. For the women that are in these financially abusive, controlling relationships, there is no easy answer. And unfortunately, a lot of times the court system does not know how they're not recognizing financial control and abuse that's happening. They it's really there's a lot of work to be done there. And I know that, certainly my organization, Women's Financial Wellness Center, is committed to continuing to fight that fight. Um,
Hmm.
there's just a lot of work to still be done in that area. But if you can, one of the podcasts that I did, one of the women that I had worked with shared her story. And one of the things she said she would do, again, from a practical standpoint, was she would go to the grocery store and then just do cash back for, some after she's made a purchase. And she would start just kind of slowly kind of squirreling away some money so she had some cash.
Hmm.
Or she would, add a few additional supplies into her cart. So she had, feminine products and, diapers and whatever else just kind of like, stashed.
Yeah.
Um, so, but yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, it's working with people that fully recognize the abuse that's happening, and having a team. I mean, I just can't say enough good about it. When people are considering the divorce process, a lot of times they don't feel like they know how to pay for those services. Like, okay, well, I know that I need an attorney, and yes, I need financial expert, but I don't know how to pay for them. So it's not uncommon for women to, borrow money from their parents or, save up some money or whatever to just what I call take that first move. Like for my clients in Wisconsin, we have a special loan program that helps them just get started. I don't have, unfortunately, those relationships with other states because it's just such a unique program. But sometimes they could do the PayPal loans, they could do the credit cards, and I know a lot of times people feel like, oh, I'm being secretive, or no, but it's a means to an end. Like you've got to take that
Right.
first step to get the support and help you need to get out,
Right.
you
I
know?
like that is I'm glad you brought that up because I think a lot of Christian women especially are really concerned about the ethical, like even squirreling away money or like one thing I did was I would buy would buy like small amounts, put small amounts of money on little gift cards and I would buy little gift cards and then I squirreled those away. And and I did feel like, "Oh, am I stealing or, like what am I doing?" But I like to give the analogy of like a kidnap victim or someone who's being held and that wouldn't you do you would do you might not you're not going to do nice things for your kidnapper just to be polite, right? You're going to try to do everything you can including lie or including sneak around or including, whatever, snoop in order to figure out how to make your escape. It's the same situation, I think.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
it's very similar. And I think, unfortunately, not enough people fully recognize, what this looks like, which I think is really important with the work that you're doing is, just this awareness around, listen, this is not okay. The abuse, the manipulation, the control, it is not okay.
yep.
And so we just have to, have be very strategic. The other part I know a lot of clients have worked with, some domestic violence, shelters and stuff like that to get some additional support as well. But in these types of situations, it really does. I mean, I can't say enough about having a team. It's too much for one person, really. I mean, it's too much for the person who's going
Yeah.
through it. And the team of people, you need an interdisciplinary approach because everybody's coming with their own experience and skill set. It's essential.
Yeah. And I think too, I've seen a lot of women go through divorce and they will almost be ready to throw in the towel and give up so much because they're just so exhausted emotionally and even physically from the marriage itself. It's almost like, Custer's last stand or whatever, and they having that team of people, they're going to rally around you and help you to stay the course until you
Yeah.
get out so that you don't look back and have regrets that you gave up things that would have set you and your kids up for better financial stability in the long run.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, absolutely.
so okay, so what how can she determine her next best move when she's probably surrounded by a Christian community who doesn't understand her situation
Mhm.
and really isn't going to be very supportive of her? They'll come out with the casseroles and the gifts of money if you lose someone that you love or if, your kid is sick, but divorce, they actually might tell you you can't even come back to church, let alone
Right.
help you. So,
Right. I know, it's one of those things where there's a lot of work to be done, certainly I think in this area within the Christian community, right? And I know over the years I've had, pastors and people in my church say, "Okay, Rhonda, do you have like this inner, cognitive dissonance about working with women that are going through divorce?" And I said, no, I don't. Because I feel like, first of all, they need somebody who's going to be an advocate in their corner, who's, praying for them, who's showing up and standing in the gap for them when they're in a really difficult spot. So I said, no, like this is God's calling on my life. I don't know how else to put it, but this is what I'm doing.
yeah.
Um, so for the women that are in that spot, I mean, I think at the end of the day, they need to make sure that they are, and I don't want to say praying more because that's not fair, right? But like just really getting in intimate time with God and listening to what he says. Because most of the time when women reach out, they're like, Rhonda, I don't feel like God has released me yet.
Yes, I
And
hear that all the time.
right
All the time. Yep.
now, whether that's hopefully that's honest, right? Like, do we really feel like that or are we scared, right? But but then they'll come back later and say, okay, I'm really feeling peace about it. I feel like I've worked through some of the things, I feel like it's time. So I think that timing is important. I think that you have to really feel out what God's telling you to do. But at the same time, I think we also have to be really honest, like uber honest, right, with ourselves. So one of the things usually I will tell people is, from a next best move perspective, certainly there's, again, these really practical things that we talked about today that they can do. Doesn't mean that they have to file. It just means that they're starting to kind of get some stuff in order. But, certainly there's a couple things, right? They can be listening to podcasts. They can continue to listen to this one. They can listen to mine, Divorce Conversations for Women. I do offer a free, consultation call where they can reach out. Let's hop on a call and I can kind of talk them, through kind of what's next or what might be helpful for them. Um, we did recently launch a new group course, a new group experience for people that most of them haven't filed, but they're still just trying to get their stuff in order. So there's information about that they can apply on the website too. But I love it when we can do some preparation ahead of time
Yes.
and really be proactive.
Yes. I it's interesting because sometimes in my private forum I'll have people that are it's like something snaps and they decide I'm done. I'm out and they will have done no preparation, nothing. They'll tell their husband that it's all over and then that is like that's basically giving him a free pass to
Yeah.
start hiding things and start, doing his own self-protective things.
Yeah.
So you don't want to do that. If you're listening and you haven't done that, but you've thought about it, don't do it. Rhonda, I'm sure you would say, get
Yeah.
learn these things, get prepared. And so there's actually a group that they can join
Yes.
on your website where they can and do you teach them then the things that they need to do or you
Yeah.
walk them through that or how does that
Yeah.
work?
Yeah. So it's called the bridge method. And really, this is something that I've been taking clients, I mean, hundreds of clients through. But what was happening was, like most of us, right? You're like, oh my gosh, the need is so great. There's so many people that need my help. I'm one person.
Yeah.
How do we make this accessible, right? And
Yeah.
so we developed a 6-month group experience, and basically I'm going to be taking them through the specific step-by-step things that they'll need to do in preparation leading up to, and then also once they file some of the things. And each of the letters, of course, stands for something, but it's very, very practical and tangible. Not meant to be overwhelming, but yeah, we got to roll up our sleeves and, get some work done as well. But then they have access to be able to ask those questions and things like that. And it's really been very, very helpful. I think the feedback we've gotten from people that have gone through it is it was just so nice to finally take a first step. Like they feel stuck, right? You this inner turmoil, this inner civil war of just, should I stay? Should I go? I don't know what to do. I'm overwhelmed. I'm feeling disrespected. I don't know what God wants. Like we just like swirl, right? And in the
Right.
meantime, it's extra stress and angst and anxiety and pressure that we put on ourselves without making any decisions.
Yep.
And so it's just kind of a good, nice step under the radar, that people can be taking. Um, I
And it
also
gives a
will,
momentum.
yeah,
Once you put some movement
yeah,
like that into your life, then you can build on that
yeah,
and gain momentum. And
yeah.
also confidence. I'm sure by the time they're done with it, they're more confident in what their next step is even going to be.
Yeah, it's good, and I think usually what happens is people get into it and they start to have some clarity and they feel it's not intended to be a support group, but I mean organically what happens is there's support in there, right?
Sure.
And people are cheering each other on and so, I'm not surprised if people in the midst of this process end up filing because now they
Yeah.
feel like they've got what they need to just really finally make that decision. And let's be honest, nobody's ever really ready. Like
Right.
there's
Oh, right.
always you're never totally ready. But
No.
I think to your point, women are really they've got an exorbitant amount of patience until they don't. And if people really understood that, you're like, this is really up here. Like once that bell has dung, like you hit the bell and it hits the top, they're done. Like
Yep.
you have exhausted every possible option to make this right. So
Yeah.
don't even go
Yeah.
there.
Exactly. Okay, so
Oh,
your website is the Women's Financial Wellness Center. What is the URL of your website? And I will put that in the
yes.
show notes too.
Thank you. It's WFWCLLC.com. Or I'm sorry, WFWCdivorce.com.
Okay, so WFWC, because it stands for Women's Financial Wellness Center, divorce.com. All
Correct.
right. Okay. And then
Yes.
I think it was there that I saw a couple of little freebie things. Do you want to talk about those?
Yes, and we're actually in the process right now of updating our website, but we will be adding 2 new freebies. So right now it says coming soon, but hopefully by the time
Okay.
this gets published, we will have some freebies on there as well.
Okay. All right. So head over there if any of this sounds interesting to you or if you're on this page right now in your life. And Rhonda, it was great to talk with you.
Oh,
I'm so glad
likewise.
you gave so much amazing information here that's going to be so helpful to people. And I'm so glad that they know that they have somebody that they can go to now too if they want further help. So I
Yes.
appreciate you being on the show. And for those of you guys who are listening, thanks so much for listening. And until next time, fly free.